The world today is a world of progress and poverty, triumph and tragedy, hope and frustration. Why? For more than half a century, this program has given a unique understanding of the meaning behind today's world news and the prophecies of the world tomorrow. This week on The World Tomorrow, David Hulme.
Greetings. People of the Western world would be stunned, dumbfounded if they knew. The governments of the United States, Britain, Canada, Australasia, South Africa would set in motion gigantic crash programs if they knew. They could know, but they don't. What don't they know, and why? A staggering turn in world events is due to erupt in the next few years. It will involve violently the United States, Britain, Western Europe, and the Middle East. It's already rather late for the free world to come awake to the real meaning behind current world events. But why don't the world's leaders see what is coming? Why are the world's best minds unseeing? The heads of state, scientists, educators, editors and news analysts, bankers and industrialists, leaders in business and commerce, why are they so unaware? It's become fashionable today to ignore the great basic cause of all things, the fact of the purpose being worked out here below and the master plan for its working out. Unreal though it may seem, some 2,500 years ago, the creator of the entire universe inspired a man named Isaiah to quote him. In Isaiah chapter 46 and verses 9 and 10, he says, "I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand." The great world powers are formulating their policies. They're laying their plans. But the next few years will see astounding events explode in a manner very different than the nation's plan. There is, you see, the great God who says, "The Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. He makes the plans of the peoples of no effect. The counsel of the Lord stands forever, the plans of his heart to all generations. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he has chosen as his own inheritance. The Lord looks from heaven. He sees all the sons of men. From the place of his habitation, he looks on all the inhabitants of the earth. He fashions their hearts individually. He considers all their works." As I said, it has become fashionable to ignore God for all intents and purposes. Oh, people acknowledge him in a general way when there's trouble and difficulty. Some call on him when everything else fails. And he may come into focus a couple of times a year at Easter and Christmas. But as far as our everyday life is concerned, as far as a great plan being worked out by him on this earth, most would profess ignorance and even embarrassment. Why is that? There is a cause for every effect. About 20 years ago, I was studying in a master's degree program at a leading British university. One of my courses was in philosophy, and one of the classes addressed the topic of proofs of God's existence. Would it surprise you to know that not a single proof of God's existence was given? Rather, we were encouraged to doubt his existence. We were shown how difficult it was to prove. Now, later in this program, I'm going to offer this free booklet, Does God Exist? This booklet will show you how you can prove God's existence step by step. Many people, hope God exists, and they'd be very happy and relieved to know that for certain. This booklet can give you that assurance. Now, different people demand different amounts of proof. You probably demand different proof than I do. But no matter who you are, no matter how skeptical you are, you can prove it if you're willing to have a truly open mind on the subject. And that's really the acid test, Do you truly have an open mind? Well, needless to say, I didn't get much help from that particular part of the philosophy class. And that, believe it or not, is the simple reason that most today in positions of leadership don't grasp the significance of world events. They've been educated, you see, to throw away the Holy Bible, the very guidebook to understanding world events and the big questions of life, like who and what is man? Why are we on this earth? Who and what is God? What is his purpose for man if he exists? Now, without that inspired guidebook, the fundamental knowledge that it gives, then man falls back on his own devices. Then we wonder why we can't solve our problems. Problems of management and labor, problems between parent and child, husband and wife, neighbor and neighbor. Oh, we can solve technical, physical problems, exacting mathematical questions, the riddle of the genetic code, the successful design of advanced computers. But social problems and evils perplex us. Human relationships and relations between nations present insurmountable barriers. Why? Why is it that we can solve the physical problems, even to the extent that a few men can leave their footprints in the dust of the moon, while millions of their fellow human beings still have to scratch out an existence in the dust of the earth? The reason we can't solve our problems here on Earth is because we've built our own world, our own civilization, and we've ignored our Creator and his instruction for mankind. We've ignored his blueprint for success. This same eternal God said this, "To whom then will you liken me, or shall I be equal? Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who has created these things?" And again, "Behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket, and are counted as the small dust of the balance. All nations before him are as nothing." The eternal God is very concerned with the fate of nations. He, of course, does not decide every little event in advance, yet in his overall plan, he reserves for himself the right to intervene and direct the course of history, particularly with the major powers and superpowers whose decisions can so greatly affect history. So 2,500 years ago, God, through his inspired prophets, laid out the overall course of the future in a series of remarkable prophecies. Those prophecies fill about 1/3 of our Bible. Through these prophecies, he addressed the nations of consequence of that time in the region we now call the Middle East, foretelling precisely critical events that would happen to them in the years ahead. Many of these prophecies are very specific, focusing on individual cities. Babylon, Tyre, Ashkelon, Ashdod, in the area we call the Gaza Strip today. Some would diminish in prestige and importance. Others would be left as desolate ruins. It seemed unthinkable at the time. These were powerful and mighty cities like New York, Chicago, London, Paris, and Moscow today. But the prophecies then soon to happen were fulfilled. God also prophesied against the great nations and empires that would rise and fall through the centuries: Egypt, Assyria, Chaldea, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But greater than these past lessons of prophecy are the events prophesied for the latter days, for our day today. Some of these mighty nations were to become little nations in our day, no longer great and influential powers. They are now a part of what we call the Third World. So think for a moment. Does it make sense for God to have foretold the future of many of the smaller powers of the world today, but to have overlooked the superpowers, the United States, the Soviet Union, and Western Europe? Nations who left themselves could affect the destiny of all mankind. We have to understand then that fulfillment of Bible prophecy has not suddenly ceased. I said that man has thrown away the key that unlocks understanding of world events. That key is knowing that unfulfilled Bible prophecy relates to our day and age and the immediate future, and that the United States and the British peoples are identified in the pages of your Bible. We're on the brink of colossal world events, a time of trouble like never before, as Christ said in Matthew 24 and verses 21 and 22. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved alive. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. But most will choose to ignore the warning. What about you? At this time in the history of Western civilization, we stand at the crossroads. We're players in a drama that began many centuries ago and over which we've had little control. The Bible shows, and this is God speaking, not man, that all human beings have been deceived. You have, I have, our leaders and educators have. In Revelation 12 and verse 9, we find this. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. You see, that's why we don't know. Now, I know it isn't popular to believe in a literal spirit being called Satan today, but the Bible, and that is God speaking, remember, says it's so. That in itself is a remarkable prophecy, and it has been and is being fulfilled. Many people realize that civilization must have taken a wrong turn somewhere along the line for us to have a world that is so filled with problems and suffering. Perhaps you'd be shocked to know how long ago man made that turn. At the beginning of human history, back in the Garden of Eden, God reveals that Satan deceived the first humans. As longtime viewers know, Herbert W. Armstrong often referred back to the incident of the two trees. Those two trees represented two ways of life. The tree of life stood for God's way of life, lived in accordance with his law of love and outgoing concern for others. The other tree, called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, represented a way of life in which man chose for himself how he would live without God's guiding hand. God had told Adam and Eve not to eat of this tree, but to choose life. Now Satan entered the picture. In Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, we find, now the serpent, and it was Satan, was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Yea, has God said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said to the woman, You shall not surely die. And he denied what God had told the woman. Satan then persuaded Eve to disregard the instructions of her Creator. And Adam and Eve were launched on the wrong path from that day on. Their descendants drifted further and further away from the way of God. Now, man has added to his own confusion in the last century by accepting a number of misleading ideas of men. These ideas are the basis of man's education in this world, and they've powerfully influenced all of us. The first idea handed down from our 19th century forebears was the theory of evolution, the idea that higher forms continually develop out of lower forms naturally. In the last 100 years, this false theory, promoted by Charles Darwin, has permeated all aspects of education. It was an attempt by man to explain the presence of a creation without a creator. In Romans chapter 1, God has much to say about this. In verse 18 we find, For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold or suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Verse 20 goes on to explain that. The invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now, in verse 21, God becomes very plain about his view of human attempts to explain away his existence, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. In verse 25, he says, such men changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator. Evolution, which is man's religion, worships the creation instead of the Creator. So let's come to some real understanding about our world. Not men's theories or speculations, but God speaking and revealing the future. One of the pivotal books of prophecy is the book of Daniel. And we've covered that so many times before on these programs. Over in Daniel 12, verses 8 through 10, we find this young Jewish prince asking about the meaning of the prophecies he was being used to write. And I heard, but I understood not. Then I said, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. And none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So the prophecies of Daniel were closed, sealed, locked up until now. But today we are living in the time of the end. Today the wise do understand. But who are the wise? Only those who fear and obey God, and who have the master key to unlock the locked up prophecies. God says in Psalm 111 and verse 10, the fear of the eternal is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all they that do his commandments. You need to understand that there is a specific key that unlocks these closed doors of prophecy. It's the definite knowledge of the true identity of the American and British peoples as they are mentioned in these prophecies. Stop for a moment and think. If the prophecies Daniel wrote could not be understood by him, if they were closed up and sealed till the time of the end, till the middle of the 20th century, as the angel said, and as Daniel wrote, then they were closed to the ancient Israelites of that day. Think a little further. These prophecies could not have been given to or known by the ancient kingdom of Israel. Daniel wrote in and after the time of the Chaldean king Nebuchadnezzar's invasion and the captivity of the kingdom of Judah. But the kingdom of Israel had long before been invaded, conquered, and its people moved out of their land, transported as slaves to Assyria. And that was 120 to 130 years before Daniel wrote. Most of those Israelite slaves later migrated from ancient Assyria northwest towards Europe. How far northwest and where they finally settled was not then known. They'd become known as the Lost 10 Tribes. But today, we do know. Today, the whereabouts of the Lost 10 Tribes is one of the ancient mysteries now cleared up. But in Daniel's day, they were lost from view, as if the earth had swallowed them up. Daniel's prophecy then was not a message to the Old Testament kingdom of Israel. Now think a little further. Nor was this prophecy a message for the Old Testament kingdom of Judah, and they are different. When Daniel wrote, the Jews already were slaves in Babylon. Daniel was one of the brilliant young princes of Judah, specially chosen for service in the king's palace in Babylon. Daniel's duties would hardly have allowed him to deliver his closed and sealed message to the Jewish slaves. And besides, the prophecy was closed up and sealed till the time of the end, our time now. The book of Daniel was not primarily a message for the Jews of Old Testament times. Finally, realize this. It's emphatically clear that these prophecies pertain to no time but to our time in this 20th century. Then recall, the greatest mystery book of the entire Bible, to most, has been the book of Revelation. But the book of Daniel is the key to the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, solely and alone do we find the world events of all prophecies correlated in order of time sequence. The book of Revelation, then, holds the key for putting all of the prophecies in proper time order. Revelation was a closed and sealed book until our time also. Now, where does all this lead us to? It leads to the fact that prophecy generally was written and preserved for our time today. And some 90% of all prophecy pertains actually to this 20th century. The one central master key to prophecy as a whole is the identity of the United States and the British peoples. These prophecies could not pertain to any time except ours. They may not be generally realized, but neither Britain nor the United States became great powers until the 19th century. Suddenly, in the very beginning of this 19th century, then, these two, until then small, minor countries, suddenly spurted to national power and greatness among nations, as no nations had ever grown and multiplied in wealth, resources, and power before. By about 1800, London had become the financial hub of the world. The United States exploded out of its swaddling clothes of the 13 original states and had acquired the expansive Louisiana Purchase. It was fast spreading out to become the mightiest nation of all time. But Britain burst forth to greatness first, and until the World Wars, had become the greatest empire or commonwealth of nations in all history. Between them, the British and American peoples had acquired more than two-thirds, almost three-fourths of all the cultivated resources and wealth of the world. All of the other nations combined possessed barely more than a fourth. Britannia ruled the waves in an age when the world's commerce was carried by sea. The sun never set on British possessions. Now think. Could the British and American peoples be ignored in prophecies of world conditions that fill a third of the entire Bible, when some 90% of all those prophecies pertain to national and international world happenings of our time now? Staggering, isn't it? Indeed it is, and yet, precisely as prophesied, Britain's sun has now set, as these same prophecies that foretold Britain's greatness revealed far in advance. Britain has already been reduced to a second or third, and some people are saying a fourth-rate power in the world. And what about the United States? Today, America finds herself heir to just about all of the international problems and headaches in this chaotic, violent world. On the world scene, nothing is so important right now as to know where these peoples are identified in scores and hundreds of prophecies. Prophecies which show why the United States and British people rose to world dominance. They reveal the causes of that greatness. Prophecies that paint a crystal clear picture of the present international dilemma. And prophecies that will open our eyes wide to see what now lies immediately ahead for our nations and what our ultimate and final status will be. Bible prophecy is not the ramblings of some ancient people struggling to find a concept of God. It's a dynamic, up-to-date, living explanation of where man is headed. In the pages of Bible prophecy, God reassures man that he has an astounding future for those who will heed. Looking into the future, God foresaw the rise of today's major nations, like the United States, the British peoples, the Soviet Union, Germany, China, and Japan. They are identified in Bible prophecy. To begin to understand this vital subject, you need to request this free book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. Now, this is a full-length book. It goes into great detail, giving you the proof of where those peoples are identified in the pages of your Bible, fully illustrated with charts and maps. It's yours free for the asking, and it happens to be the most popular publication we've ever offered. Now, over 4 million copies in print. You need this book. Along with that book, why not request also, Does God Exist? the booklet I mentioned earlier in this program. This booklet will show you how you can know that God exists. Now, we've nothing to sell on the World Tomorrow program. Both of these publications are free. There's no cost, no obligation, no request for money. So why not go to the telephone and call toll-free 1-800-423-4444. That's 1-800-423-4444. And request the United States and Britain in Prophecy and Does God Exist? While you're doing that, also request a free subscription to the Plain Truth magazine. The Plain Truth is one of the world's great mass circulation magazines. It's published monthly. It explains world events in the light of Bible prophecy. This issue has the cover story about Britain. And here an article about the founding of America. There's also a regular feature in the back of this publication every month, Understanding World Events and Trends. I think you'll find the Plain Truth to be the most helpful magazine you could read. Every month there are articles showing how the events and trends of the day relate to the prophecies of the Bible. Plain Truth readers understand not only what is happening in the world around them, but why it's happening, and what's even more important, where it's all heading. Our readers will be prepared for the future. It's also a human interest magazine, giving solutions to the problems facing families in today's complex world. For over 50 years, all the literature offered on the World Tomorrow program has always been sent free of charge. God's truth is not for sale. So for a free subscription to the Plain Truth and these free booklets, Does God Exist? And the United States and Britain in Prophecy, call toll-free 1-800-423-4444. That's 1-800-423-4444. Or you can write The World Tomorrow, Pasadena, California, 91123. That's The World Tomorrow, Pasadena, California, 91123. Next week, I'll be discussing further the identity of the United States and Britain in prophecy and what's in store for these peoples. Until next week, then, this is David Hulme for The World Tomorrow. Goodbye, friends.
For the free literature offered on this program, write The World Tomorrow, Pasadena, California, 91123. In Canada, Box 44, Vancouver.